This is Emery O'Leary, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
We do things around here. We make things and we tell stories, right? It's one of the things that we do here, Emery. And I guess the first thing I want to get into, you're Benicia people, I'm Benicia people. That's always fun. But you're a storyteller and you've got a degree in screenwriting and whatnot, and not just a single, but you've gone on to bigger things and you're making things. So I thought it'd be fun to have you on and maybe talk about some of the projects that we're looking at working on.
Yeah, absolutely.
When did you know you needed to do this, and how uneasy did it make you? This is not a gentle career to pick. I mean, there's stories all over the place of people trying to work in Hollywood. Like, I live in an RV on a street, I'm homeless, and I work on a top 10 show. Like these stories exist. Very
luckily, I've never had to have that level of starving artist syndrome happen to me.
Right.
If we're asking where I fell in love with movies, that's its own story, right? My grandpa showed me Evil Dead when I was like 9 years old, and I just fell in love with it. But I started to realize I wanted to make movies in high school. I had taken a film production class in middle school. It was fun, but it wasn't something I really thought of as a career. I had kind of been, I'm going to be a history teacher. Like, I was like, I love history. I have a fascination with it. And I was like, the only thing that I could imagine doing in history was a teacher. And then I took a film production class at Benicia High School. Unfortunately, I don't think they have it anymore. But it was with Matt O'Reilly, who's just a great guy, excellent teacher, taught graphic design, taught yearbook at the school, also taught film production. And I started to just make movies. And I think that's when I started to realize that it was something I loved. That it was a space where I could kind of combine a lot of things that I liked, right? That I could combine, writing stories, something that I had been doing since I was, 10 or something, with actually physically putting a story together in a way that someone was going to see it and experience it, and learning how you could tell stories and tell emotions through story was,
right.
A big thing for me. But I'll say the moment it really became a career is when I was 16. I got lucky. A person my parents had gone to college with was going to direct a feature film. And I was like, hey, I'll be on it. I'll do anything. And I will work for free. I'll do whatever I can. And he was like, let me talk to them. I'll get back to you. And then I got on it. It's called You Can't Say No. I think it's 2016. Stars Hoos Miller, Marguerite Moreau, Peter Fonda in his last film role. And I don't know, I just loved it. Being Peter's PA for his time on set, Peter was exactly what you'd expect if you watched Easy Rider. He was a menace, and he made fun of me for not knowing how to hit a bong at 16 years old. And I got off that movie and I was like, I will do nothing else for the rest of my life.
Yeah. That's neat. It's neat to find that early success and parents that support it. One of the, I go back to Benicia High every year and I talk to the students there because when we were kids, anytime anybody showed up like this, they weren't honest with us. They would say things like, they'd be former students, like, oh, being in college is so hard. I study all the time. And I'm like, you didn't study when you were here. I'm not buying that. And so I just go back and I'm straight with them. Look, just from my experience. And also my path has been pretty non-traditional. And so there's some value in that. But one of the things I say is, like, if you're interested in the arts, continue to pursue it. And my advice to all, like, if you're going to go on any kind of a college path, community college, 4-year, gap year, whatever it's going to be, just go where the A's are, right? Go where the magic is. And if it's choir and you end up staying in choir and you get a degree in choral arts or whatever it is, that's a degree. That's a degree, and you got to study something wonderful. And even if you don't stay in it and you're just someone who sings in a church choir because that's the best place to go, and that is how you exercise that love muscle, man, awesome, right? Maybe you go get into the union and you move down to Hollywood and you do choral stuff and you get booked every day of the week because they're like, oh, thank God, someone new. We need someone, and these things happen all the time. So maybe you don't get a career out of it, but all kinds of people get a degree in something that they don't get to work in that field.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even, we talked about, I have a degree in screenwriting. I'm still working on film projects, but we also have talked about, me and you, that I just got a job and I'm not actively making movies at this job, right? Am I still creating creative content? Yes, I'm marketing for movie theaters. I'm marketing something, a product I love, right? Movies, movie theaters. But it's not exactly making a film.
Yeah. 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 But when you work in this field, you have to have many hats. And sometimes you got to take a couple of those hats off and get paid. But I want to go back to high school because we also had look, this is the 80s. And so it's different. So video cameras were pretty new. And there was a video production class. And that happened because this guy, Mr. Meharry, his kid now is a Mr. Meharry. It's like, so second generation. But Mr. Meharry's like, hey, I'm going to get a video camera. A couple of them, and then just let these kids run crazy around the school with hall passes and video cameras. And, it was jackassery, right? But we were, it's like Little League, right? Yeah, we're going to put the ball on the tee for you. Yeah, you're going to all field the ball, but that's fine. Early soccer, right? And so we were just making things, being creative and doing a little bit of editing, but really very, very basic editing. But we were exposed to it. And for me, it stuck. I took it the next year in college, my freshman year, I took a video production class and I learned a little more. And I've sort of always been in that kind of, and I ended up in mass media, TV, radio, like was my degree, right? And so even though that class was just kind of rinky dink and not all that developed, and Mr. Meharry wasn't like, here's the theory of making films. He's like, here's some fresh batteries. Here's some hall passes. I'm positive you guys are going to get close to getting in trouble. I just want to see you before the end of class. And we would leave campus because we could back then. And we would do all kinds of stuff. And I got the videos here in my house recently. I started looking at them. And, look, they're funny. And for what we could do back then with the equipment available, they're fantastic, right?
Yeah.
And they just make you smile. So I guess my thing is if you're watching this, and I'm talking to the audience now, and your kid or you think you maybe want to make something or they want to, it's all right. It's all right to go and get a degree in that or not, or get a job in that and then decide you change. It's all right. You go out and try it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, that's a thing that I've kind of always tried to stress just as, I think we talked about it once or twice before, but, I've taught at CSU Northridge where my undergrad was, and I've gotten to, run a lecture at Chapman University. And part of it was just, I like trying to encourage people to create, because part of it is they might make something incredible. They might not make something great, but as long as they're learning how to create stories, believe it or not, that kind of appeals to every single field you could ever work in, right? Every presentation you do in any job is still a form of telling a story. It might just be the story of the project you built that week, but it's still telling a story. It is a real skill.
Yeah. That skill's marketable. Like you're talking about what you're doing now and everything else, understanding how to tell a story about a story. And I guess what I'm saying here is marketing, sales, these things are all in the same field, right? And so understanding one of the best degrees to get is an MFA. If you're going to get a secondary degree, you get that Master of Fine Arts because you're going to get something back that an MBA just can't have, and you want to stand out. So there's real value in that. And so I'm fascinated by when you, look, I meet all these authors because of this ridiculous show that I have here, and they write amazing things. And I'm like, why isn't this something bigger? And I'm learning how to turn those things into better ideas. I'm learning what the market will pay for, but it's incredible the amount of amazing stories that just drop into my lap, where you this is an easy screenplay. Get a screenplay written, get a little speculative and see if you can find a taker for this. I mean, I'm just looking at a rack of books that are like that right now in front of me. And it's incredible. There are stories everywhere. How do you walk through life and not just drive yourself mad with all the stories that you can tell?
I do drive myself mad. No, I mean, truly, for a long time, it was a notebook. I used to do it pen to paper. Nowadays, I just have my notes app on my phone a lot too. And it'll just be, oh, something popped in and I have to get it down before it passes because people are just hearing different stories from different people every day. And every time you go through a new experience, you're pulling a different emotion that maybe you didn't feel before. And we've talked about just how many stories there are, right? Growing up in Benicia, we heard this, this myth of this barge fight that happened. That's not a myth, right?
Yeah.
That is a real story. And clearly it fascinated us both. We've stuck to wanting to talk about that story for a long time. And that's just a story that growing up in Benicia, you just kind of heard, right? It just was like, hey, somebody sometime back in, I don't know, maybe the 1800s, they fought on a barge.
There's a book for it right by my desk.
Yep. And Ralph wrote that excellent book, and since then I've written a screenplay about that story. But those stories, they seep into you, and so for me, my biggest film is This Is Their Land, this short film about the Modoc War of 1872. And I would constantly have people say, well, where did you even run into that? Right. You're not native. You aren't from that area. How did this story come to you? And I was like, well, here's the crazy part. I just really loved caves. Yeah. And I found out that there was a park on the border of California and Oregon that had the largest concentration of caves in North America. And I went. And then because I was a history nerd, I learned there was a historical walk. I walked through the stronghold. And then that story captured me, right? These 70 Modoc men holding off 400 plus U.S. soldiers from this natural lava rock fortress. And, we talk about like we create stories, and it's sometimes I feel like people think you're creating a story from scratch, and sometimes maybe you are, but not always, right? Like even when I ran across the Modoc War story, all I kept saying was, this already is a movie, right? Like not only do you have this incredible war epic, but you have factions within the tribe trying to convince Kent Push, Captain Jack, trying to convince him to kill the general in the middle of a peace tent. You have infighting between these people, and all of that is dramatic and revealing, and things that, in the hands of a gifted storyteller becomes a story that people relate to, right? And so I do kind of drive myself crazy with all the ideas, because I go to places and I like to explore and travel, and all of a sudden I'm like, that's an idea, that's an idea, that's an idea. Where can I make an idea?
Yeah. Well, the other thing is, so Eric Vickery, I had him on my show recently, and this is, I think I told you about this story. It's a baseball team in just post-war, and so you've got all these guys whose baseball careers were interrupted because of the war, and they're like, nah, I just want to get back to being normal, and I think I can go play ball. And so they get on this team, and it's not a prime team, but you got to start somewhere. And so the story's telling the story, like all these dudes, each of them has a story, right? Yeah. And Eric does a great job of pulling down what's left of the record. And there's a lot of it. Because it was a very big thing. The people on this team were in a bus, and that bus goes off the edge of a cliff, going through the mountains in Washington. And this tragedy just grips a nation. It's the worst sports team tragedy in history, because basically almost everybody on this bus dies, And so it's just this crazy thing that is just desperate. I mean, look at that picture. It's desperate to be told, like the era and everything else. And the thing you realize when you are in the business of storytelling is there's a baseball movie every single year. Baseball movies work. And so now you just got to start. It's not easy. You got to start solving certain problems. I need money. Who believes in baseball? And there could be someone that's like, I don't care anything about baseball. I love stories about Washington. I'll fund this project. And they'll crack off a check and look, this happens. It's not easy, but it happens. And like, here's $2 million, get it done. And then you get to go make the damn thing. And it's ridiculous, but it does happen, and it's not easy. But people that take the time to put the pieces together, the people together who have the pieces, and that's sort of what I do, you get to make something that's bigger than what you and I can walk through that little area, through that lava rock. It's bigger than what we are, and it becomes its own living thing.
Yeah, and I mean, that's, in a lot of ways, that's how This Is Their Land came about, right? Was that I had walked through, I'd learned the story. I'd kind of, fell in love with trying to find a way to tell it. And I'd always been like, it has to be a feature film. And then I had a college requirement to pitch a thesis film, and it had to be 15 minutes. And for a while I was just stumped. And then I came back at this Modoc War project in a different way. And luckily I did pitch, a 15-minute version of this Modoc War story. But when I did, Roman Zaragoza, who now is one of the stars of CBS's Ghosts, he had just returned to college because of the pandemic, because the Oregon Shakespeare Festival had been shut down. And he heard me pitch this as we had been accepted as one of the 4 films going. And he was like, hey, I'm Native. I have connections to a bunch of Native tribes up in this area. I have connections to a bunch of Native actors. He had been working with a LA-based theater company called Native Voices. And so he started to connect pieces with us, right? And as we brought in these different people, all these pieces kind of come together. And that movie doesn't happen the way that it turns out without that happening. I mean, if we don't meet Roman, we don't meet Joseph Dupree. And if we don't meet Joseph Dupree, the Modoc language never ends up in our film, right?
Yeah.
And we're the only film to ever use the Modoc language. And that's part of what is, incredible about film, right? I think I've heard it in conversations with people lately where they'll try to pitch me on using like heavy AI to make projects. And I'm always like, here's my one thing about that. Every person who touches a project improves it. They bring something new to the table. Yeah. They bring their own experiences, their own connections, and they constantly improve what you are doing.
Yeah. Yeah. There's, I understand the need to try to look at AI and use it for things because there are certain capabilities that are incredible, and you don't have to pay someone to do something that you used to have to pay them. There's a lot of things like that already exist. We for the most part do a lot of music on keyboards, and there's just not a stable of musicians that can steadily work all year round on different projects. Those people still exist, but there are not as many of them, right? And so there is another Benicia High grad, Raul Vega. He makes things for who's the biggest music guy besides John Williams? Who's the other guy who does all of the big movies?
Oh my gosh, I feel like I should know it right off the top of my head. I know who you're talking about too.
You should. Yeah. He's done everything, all of them.
It's the guy who did like Dunkirk and everything too.
Yeah, I want to say Jan Hammer, but that's not him. He's but
Zimmer?
You know who I'm talking about. No. He works for him. And, that dude, since he does all of these superhero movies, all of these big movies like Dunkirk and everything else, Raul goes there and he just makes sounds for him. Yeah. And he just sits there in the lab and he's got a degree in music. He makes money for the biggest film scoring guy in the world. And
there's my dream's still spinning, Hans Zimmer.
You'll get there. I'm not even going to worry about it. I already know who I'm talking about. As soon as we say the name, you're like, you guys are dummies. But what he also does in his spare time that he gets is he gets to work on his own projects. Yeah. And he's driven to work harder because this is not work for him, right? It's part of what he gets to create, and this is just, look, we're all just dudes from Benicia, and not a big town, not a big Hollywood town, but there's a lot of people that have done things. One of the voiceover actors for that, what's that kid's show called with the Pickles kid? Rugrats. She's one of the voices for one of those people, and there's just all of these creative people from a little town like Benicia. I wanted to talk to you about another story. And actually, about this story. So we've talked about this. But Chris Thomas King wrote a history of the blues, right? Yeah. And we're talking about maybe working on something with him. And we've reached the time. So Chris has done the whole circuit. And I want you to tell me what you think about this. He's done the whole circuit around Hollywood. He won Grammys. He was in Oh Brother Where Art Thou and just smashed in that. And he has always tried to say, hey, there's a history of the music you guys are missing. Like the history of the blues is not what you think it is. And this is my music. Let me tell you what it is. There's this oral tradition. There's also actual evidence that shows that he was right. But then there's also this place called Storyville. And it's just this lewd, wild place where there's all these genius musicians that create every kind of vice and everything else. So it's interesting to me to think about, here's this story that's just huge, can easily be like I told you it was like Boardwalk Empire, like an HBO multi-season, multi-part thing. And it's so big, in a lot of ways, it's scary for me because I don't know how to walk on that tightrope. I know how to walk on a tightrope, but I don't know how to walk on this tightrope, right? And so I don't even know, should I even be doing this shit, And I don't know why I shouldn't, and I'm dumb enough to just keep taking my stick and just walking further forward. But I don't know. What do you think about the size and scope of something like that? I'm talking about an HBO project like it's nothing.
Yeah. And I think I think this is part of the challenge of just being a creative in general is you kind of have to dream big. You know, if somebody says, "Hey, I'm giving you $500,000, you got to make a movie within these constraints," that's one thing, right? You'll make something incredible. You'll work within the constraints, and sometimes constraints are helpful, right? But also, when you're trying to attract notice, sometimes it's helpful to dream big. I mean, the project that gets me the most notice is in some ways the one that's the hardest to produce. It's 27 Rounds of the Sun. It's the story of this barge battle in Benicia, and kind of the same thing as what we're talking about with Storyville. It's a huge world. It's a period that obviously both of us are very fascinated in, this kind of late 19th century, you know, the 80s-ish.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But part of that's America has kind of left that period behind. And, you know, we love to talk about like Roaring Twenties onwards, and we tell a lot of stories about that period. But, you know, the 1880s is a really interesting period where America has kind of past the whole westward expansion thing, but it's also not. And that mindset's still there. And the Wild West is gone, but the wild cities are still there. You know, the cities kind of haven't been tamed. I mean, with us talking about the barge fight and everything, Jim Corbett would fight on the Barbary Coast, a neighborhood that now is completely gone in San Francisco, right? But the Barbary Coast at the time was incredible. I mean, you want to talk about the same kind of concept. I mean, a den of sin, right? But also home to a bunch of traveling sailors and to, you know, I always joke about it because it's one of the best newspaper quotes I think I've ever read. But there's this crazy quote about the Barbary Coast where they basically create the term hoodlum to speak about the people who inhabit the Barbary Coast. And that's actually where we get that word, is this idea of these neighborhoods that are downtrodden and very much, you know, things that nowadays we might refer to as ghettos in some way, but they're downtrodden neighborhoods that all these poverty-stricken people try to find ways to survive. And sometimes that's these things that are distasteful to polite society, right? Which, especially in the 1880s, is still a huge thing. And so when we talk about a place like Storyville or the Barbary Coast, right, we're talking about these people who are finding unique ways to live and to survive. And out of poverty comes a lot of great art, and it comes the blues, and it comes incredible things that we don't see coming. I mean, especially when we talk about, you know, the barge and these boxing fights, right? Jim Corbett, out of the Barbary Coast comes the term shadow boxing. You know, there's the whole myth of him fighting in front of a mirror, and they say that, you know, I've got $10 on his shadow. And that's where we get these terms. And I think a lot of creation comes out of these areas that we view as rough and tumble. So when we talk about Storyville, part of why I see potential for a series there is that the area, the location is a character in the story, right? It's something I always tried to stress with This Is Their Land, is like the lava rock is a character. This is an area not like anything else around it, right? There's not a lot of shield volcanoes in California. And so this was something the U.S. Army had no concept of. It becomes a character in its own right, you know, and it's the same concept with something like Storyville. You know, the neighborhood is a character. It is affecting the way these people live their lives, and it is limiting them, but it's also creating spaces for really interesting growth.
Yeah, it's you know, the late 1800s. So during that time, you know, a lot of things are going on. You know, Congress passes things like the Dawes Act that has, you know, lasting ramifications on things. But there's also the damn shootout at the OK Corral, you know, and so there's all this like civilization, but there's also this, you know, we're still sorting things out. The Indian Wars continue on into the early 1900s, right? And so Geronimo and all these cats are out there and they're whacking people and they're killing farmers and ranchers are like, let's kill these Mexicans because they killed these Indians. And then there's just all this fighting back and forth across these distinct, it's tribal, really what it is. And the Army's part of it.
You know, the world is very much not settled in that period, you know. We're fighting a war against Mexico. Then that's done. Now we're fighting a war against Spain, and we're fighting in the Philippines. We're becoming, you know, a colonist nation, something that up until that point we're not really yet, you know, an imperial
Right.
nation. And all of that has effects that change things. You know, I pitched a story in college talking about, I used to call it the arrival of the Mikado, right? But I was talking about the Choshu Five, who were just 5 samurai in Japan who were there when Commodore Perry's black ships came to open up Japan. And they saw, you know, this imperialist nation show up, and they were like, if we don't change something, we're going to be the next person to get downtrodden on. These guys all cut their top knots. They stowed away to England. They studied. They came back. They become the heart of imperial Japan. They build what becomes a war machine that comes and bites us in the butt, right? And in some ways, they're incredible. They're, you know, incredible statesmen, incredible innovators.
Yeah.
But they, you know, they directly contribute back to this. It's like we show up with ships, we force them open, and in some ways, we lead and pave the way to Imperial Japan's existence, right? They don't modernize, maybe, you know, for another 20 or 30 years if Commodore Perry doesn't show up. And so, you know, I think that period of time is just so rich in stories because the world isn't settled, right? Even on the local level, you know, one of the things they talked about in the Barbary Coast, they invented street lights in San Francisco, those oil street lamps, because the Barbary Coast was so dangerous to walk in the dark. And so they're innovating out of pure necessity. They don't even those streets yet, right? And so I always think it's just such a fertile ground for stories. You have so many stories in that period that have kind of flown under the radar, you know?
Sure. And, you know, there's so many things in that time frame that really are. Whenever I go to San Francisco and I've got a few minutes, I go out to the financial district and I go and I walk and I just stare at the bank that General Sherman built well before the Civil War. And so, and I think here's a guy who gets out of the army and he's like, I'm just going to stay here in California. I see the opportunities. He knows how to marshal things and, you know, and then there's a run on banks and he manages to close his bank and settle their debts. And that's it. That whole thing goes away. And then fast forward, not that many years, you know, a little more than 10. And he's a general in the damn Civil War, you know, and he's like anything can happen because he had no intention of doing that, right? But that's what he ends up.
You know, those connections and the way that those stories continue to grow. General of the Army at the time of the Modoc War, Williams comes to Sherman.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. See, same dude.
You know, same guy, and and he's the one who's the one who orders the Modoc to be removed forcibly if you must, right? He starts that war in some ways, and he's the one who says, "Hey, make no reservation necessary, but their graves in the dirt." He escalates the war, right? And so, you have these people who are multifaceted and happening in all these different moments and ways. And one of the things I always thought was fascinating was, you know, when I was working on the Modoc War project, you know, I had started to research even General Canby, the general who dies during the Modoc War. And when you talk about Canby, you know, you can go back to his past as a Civil War hero. You can go back to him pissing off, you know, General and then President Grant. But you also can talk about how he long walks the Navajo, right? All of these people live these full lives in this period because there's just so much going on. And I always thought that's one of the kind of fascinating things is you have so many land grants, you have so many wars, you have so much territory being seized and changing hands, and there's just a power vacuum in this country. And it allows for some really interesting stories about illegal boxing and, you know, resistance against the U.S. government that we just don't see at this scale nowadays, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's really true. You know, you think about a lot of the different eras and a lot of different times, and even movies that have come and gone. The Postman, you know, the Postal Service, the ability to move mail really helped establish the state. You know, whatever. I don't mean like California, any state, the government, right?
Yeah.
And having like that capability, there was some need for the state. Otherwise, you got a bunch of ranchers and farmers and, you know, miners, and these people don't need a larger entity, but there's these little pieces that happen. And we lose sight of this. And when you do things like I did and go overseas and you see us say, hey, we're gonna establish this government here, you know, and like, hey, they can't reliably move money. safely or even through banks. There's no ATMs.
Yeah.
We went to the fire department. They've not fought a fire in 2 months, but we've seen all these fire, and so you have all these problems, and we think it's easy to just go somewhere and establish a norm like, when there's trouble, call the police. They will help you, right? That as much as we have a conflicted relationship with the police, even still to this day, we have a trust for the most part that, like, hey, someone's here, and then they'll send the police, and I go, thank God, here come the police. Hope they can get here fast, right? Right. That doesn't happen in Afghanistan. They're like, who am I going to call? Well, first off, there's no cell towers. There's no electricity here. So who am I going to call? And you're like, oh, yeah, they're going to walk from where? So we have these illusions of this. And so that's where storytelling comes in, is like to provide this context of a time like the Japanese-Russian War. Oh, my God, what a great story, right? We're never going to tell that thing because we don't care about it, but it's super important to Western history, because of the way it changes how war is fought. And it's just in the early the aughts. It's in the aughts when they fight this thing. We know nothing about this. You have to learn about it. And then you read the books and you're like, oh my God, what an amazing story. And I'll throw another one at you and then I'm going to let you go. But Laura Ingalls Wilder has this amazing life. She's born just after the Civil War and she dies at the dawn of the space age. She gets in a car with her daughter and her best friend, all ladies, and they drive in an open, like Model A, I think it was, across the nation from, Missouri to California to go to the World's Fair. I mean, this is like, there's not even roads. Sometimes they're driving like, this is not a 4-wheel drive vehicle, right? And there's these ladies out there. And so we have no idea that women were plucky enough to go do this kind of thing. But that was nothing for Laura. She had traveled from Minnesota down to St. Louis in a wagon, Yeah. So as much as like we try to dig her up and shake her off and go, you're an ugly, terrible person, and throw her away, actually she's this model of everything about America from that era.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, I like to tell stories about some of the unsung heroes as much as I can. And one of the ones I've always been fascinated because I've spent so much time at Lava Beds National Monument is the man who got it to become a monument. And the fun thing about him is that he was nobody, right? His name's J.D. Howard. He'll never be in a history book. He was just a mill worker and he just started hiking and exploring these caves. He started giving tours. And then when he noticed damage to the caves, he started harassing the United States government for years and years and years. And he would donate artifacts to museums and tell them to harass the United States government until he got it protected as a monument. And I mean, this land that I love, this area that I, really have a connection to, it doesn't exist in its current form without the work of this random mill worker who spends his entire life fighting for one spot. And I always think that's part of what's incredible about stories and about people, right? Everyone, even somebody who's just a complete nobody who you can't find in a footnote, has some kind of incredible story about what they decided to spend their life doing.
Yeah, yeah. Billy the Kid was lost to history until a news reporter dug him up and just caught the last bits of the living memories of that dude. And otherwise he's gone. So there's all kinds of these stories where, have I said the Mormon Wars? The Mormon Wars are fascinating. The Paiutes and the Mormons going at it. My buddy, is that book up here? No, but my buddy Jim wrote a book about the Pony Express. The Pony Express was around for 18 months. That's it. 18 months. That's you can't. Yeah. Right. Yeah. You can't get an AA degree in 18 months. You can't do a lot of things in 18 months. Certainly can't get a black belt. This thing is still talked about, but no one's ever really done a great job with like, this is what it was like to be one of these dudes.
Yeah.
And that book is available just for making, like you just go, all right, let's go. And let's write a script and do these things. So how do you take things that are incredible like that and decide what you're going to work on? Because you can only work on so many things. And how many things can you work on at once?
I mean, I'm finding the limit. I'm working on a lot of projects right now. I mean, we are trying to make a feature version of the Modoc War story if we can, right? Me and you are working on a variety of projects that we've talked about. I wrote this script about about the barge fight, about Jim Corbett versus Joe Kowinski in Benicia, right?
Yeah.
Right now, I'm working on a documentary about the Port Chicago 50, who were, early civil rights leaders who, who after an explosion in Sassoon Bay, they decided if they were civilians, we'd call it a work stoppage, but instead it becomes a huge blow up case. The Navy tries them for mutiny, finds them guilty. And it wasn't until just a few months ago that they're exonerated.
Yeah.
And,
it's crazy.
Good on the Navy for exonerating them after 80 years. But it took a lot of grassroots activism over decades to get that to happen. And, I think that's the thing about finding the stories, right? Is finding a reason why we're going to care, right? And for me, when we're talking about a project like Port Chicago, these people have gone unrecognized for a long time. And a lot of times they've been talked about by various people throughout history as cowards who didn't go back to work. And that wasn't what they were. They were fighting for better conditions after a deadly explosion that killed, 300 of their coworkers. Right. And, when we talk about the Modoc War, these, are there conflicts with the settlers? Absolutely. But also we have to acknowledge that the United States government placed them on a reservation with their tribal enemies and didn't provide them any of the promised support that they gave them. So what do we expect them to do but to go back to the area they know how to live in, right?
Right.
And the war only happens because we try to force them back onto that same reservation that they're having problems on, right? So, there's always elements of stories that we connect to. And I think finding the stories that compel us personally is the challenge, right? And so I'm constantly taking on projects, and sometimes I'm taking on too many and I start to get overwhelmed. But if I believe in the story, I want to find a way to tell it, right? And that might be years down the line, right?
Yeah.
I might not get something made about the barge fight in 5 years, but in 10, I might get an incredible HBO doc made, right? And I think it is always that work, right? If I believe in a story, it's going in the vault and I'll keep working on it. And if there's too many stories in any given moment, well, I'll put one on the shelf, but at some point I'm still going to pull it back off the shelf. Right.
Yeah.
And I think that's our goals as storytellers has to be to continue to tell the stories we believe in, to pull from everything that we can find and love and care about and find how we're going to make other people care about it too. And sometimes it's not fast, right? Sometimes you'll write something for years, but one day you're going to find it and it's going to matter to people. I always think, the moment I felt that with This Is Their Land was actually, despite, everyone that I got to show it to, we got to show it as part of the Native Visions Film Festival. I was by myself. I was the only white person in a room full of Native people. I wasn't sure how it was going to be responded to. And a lot of them were just like, this has a lot of similarities to our story. And captured a lot of those emotions. And the moment I really felt it was I was walking out of the theater. There was a little boy, maybe 6 years old. And he started mimicking my lead actor's voice and was like, "Ee," and he's speaking the word in Modoc, a language he doesn't know, and copying this person that he saw something of himself in. And God, it was the moment where I just was like, man, I worked 3 hard years on this, and in this moment, it's worth it, right?
Yeah, it is. And we've, I'll say that we just have come so far as a nation in terms of trying to understand what that responsibility looks like. I've got Chris's story here, right?
Yeah.
But one of my really good friends is a screenwriter. He's a Black guy. He's gay. All these things sort of matter because he works hard in the writer community, giving back and making sure that the next minority screenwriter is more equipped to work. And he knows where to push and say, you think there's changes, Pete, but you're not seeing inside, and I'll just pick Netflix.
Yeah.
They don't have a Black guy sitting across the table greenlighting projects. That guy doesn't exist, right? And I'm picking on Netflix. I don't know if that's true right now today, but he's like, that's where the problem is now, is people who control the money are still not Black. There's some ladies, but there's all these things he's talking about. So we're trying to manage a business where we're trying to be better at this. By the way, so I go to Hilliard. His name's Hilliard Guess. And I say, Hilliard, I've got this story. I have no problem telling it, but it's not necessarily my story. It's a Creole story. It's not even your story. You're black in a way that these guys are different, And he's like, I wish one of us would have grabbed that story and paid attention to it. Pete, it's your story. You found it. You get to tell it with Chris. Chris is certainly an authority because he's a Creole guy from New Orleans. I mean, you don't get any more authentic, but we do know that we're supposed to do these kind of things. I'm working on this Felipe doc, about this project.
Yeah.
And one of the things, if I can get this thing funded, I'm going to offer it to Dominicans first because it's a Dominican story. And by the way, we're going to, as much as possible, record this thing in Spanish. And that's, I don't even know how we're going to pull that off because we might have to subtitle most of the things that are done by the Spanish guys. So I don't want them to speak in native voice, but it gets expensive, but
it is. And it's
and when you sell this thing to the Latin market, though, it needs to be legitimate for that market. And the music needs to be Dominican, not just Caribbean vibes, bro. It's like, it's got to be like, and we know that responsibility exists now. When do we go too far with that stuff, though? When does the care about the quality and the nature of the story lose ground to the marketability and legitimacy of the story? Because sometimes you see things like, I've completely given up on Star Wars because I'm like, I don't know what's going on in this universe anymore. There's too much of it, and it's gotten crazy.
I also think it's polluted by a little too much going on, right? Like there's just too much Star Wars being produced nowadays.
Yeah, but, totally. Yeah.
When we're talking about the kind of responsibility conversation, it's something we had a lot with This Is Their Land because when we started, we didn't have that many connections to the Modoc community at the time. We had general native connections, right? But to Modoc folks, we didn't, and it was work to make those connections. And when I think of where the project started, which is just on a file in my computer with me surrounded by history books, right? And I think of the fact that by the end, we have Joseph Dupree, one of the only people who really knows the language inside and out, coming and translating and helping teach our actors to speak on set, and how much using the Modoc language meant to the Modoc community when they did get to see the finished film, right? And I think about working with Debbie Riddle, who, she's a direct descendant of Wainima, one of our main characters, and when she came to me, she had concerns, and I was downright scared of Debbie Riddle the first time I met her because she's a tough old lady, and God, I just sat there and I listened, and I do think that more than anything, I've had people say, oh, it's not your story to tell, and I agree to that to some extent, right? But I do think as storytellers, we have a responsibility to spread stories that aren't necessarily our own, right? Partially just because who knows who else is looking for it, right? What if nobody's looking for it and the story just doesn't get told because I looked at it and I said, well, it's not my story to tell, moving on. And I think if you come at something with a sense of, I want to be respectful and I want to put in the work to make it matter and to make it something that the people whose story it is, they feel proud of it at the end product. Whether they have issues with it, that's its own thing. But if at the end they feel that you have put in the work and put in the time and you've tried to be sensitive and to work with them, I think that reflects well on you, and it reflects well on those stories. I think that those stories don't need to be told exclusively by the people they belong to, as long as the people they belong to are part of the storytelling process.
Right. Yeah. And I think it goes too far. And this is a conversation, so you tell me what you think. But when Gal Gadot gets cast as I'm going to say ISIS, not ISIS, but all right. Who's the Egyptian lady? Mark Anthony and her. Gosh, Cleopatra. Yeah, she gets cast as Cleopatra, and look, some of these people are just running their yaps, and who cares what they say, right? But like, oh well, she's Jewish, so she can't be that person. First off, we have no idea what Cleopatra looked like. We know she was beautiful. We know certain things about her, but She's Ptolemaic, so she's partly Greek, but even Greek back then is not the Greek person we think of now. And by the way, Egypt and Israel, they share a border, so she might very well look like she could even be Ptolemaic blood herself, and so we get so wrapped up in that the person has to be this or has to be that, but the actor is the person that has to become that person. And it's not about the physicality necessarily. It's not about the genetics. It's about the actor. I mean, you give Willem Dafoe a part, it's going to get played and it's going to be great. So we sometimes get a little wrapped up in, it's always so hard to make a movie or make a documentary that if we add too many problems, it's just hard to stick it and make it a great movie.
Yeah, and I think they're challenges that you always run into, right? And I do think intentions matter, right?
Right.
Because I don't know for that example too much, right? But like, I don't know if you remember when Ghost in the Shell came out and they cast Scarlett Johansson in the role of what is typically an Asian protagonist. Why? Right?
Yeah.
There wasn't really a purpose to it other than that they were attaching her name to it, right? With This Is Their Land, none of our actors were Modoc. Now, they were native, but they were from a variety of different cultures, right? And I always thought that, what I thought was of value is that they wanted to speak to our Modoc consultants, that they wanted to hear their stories, that they wanted to put in that effort. And I think in general, with all creatives, if you're putting in that effort, it's going to get there. It's going to end up mattering. Yeah. It's not, you're going to beat the backlash if you are actively trying to do good.
I'm going to ask this in a different way.
Yeah.
When you're producing something, when you're directing something, and you've got a decision between worrying about offense giving and getting this fucking thing done, and yet those two things come together. It's like, we are not going to talk to any more these people. We're not going to slow down for this. We have just got to get this thing on film, like this, because these decisions happen, right? Yeah. And they're not just a political or ideological or any other kind of thing. Like at some point you're like, stop. This thing has got to get made. We've got to get moving forward. And once we pick that lane, this is going to be what it is, because we can't be so precious with everything, right? And I guess that's the question I'm asking is it seems like it's less okay now to just get the goddamn thing done and make it great, as opposed to making it without causing any kind of a backlash. It's like, no, make a movie that makes a splash. That's fine. Because at some point you just got to get the camera on someone and let the work happen.
Yeah. And at some points, causing offense will start a dialogue and start a conversation, and at some points it'll go the other way too. I mean, with This Land, we had a Civil War group that was supposedly going to work with us and provide a bunch of props, and they decided they didn't like my title. They thought it was quote an open air statement for Native rights, and they abandoned us at the last second, and we had to work to get it made anyways, right? Sometimes it just happens. You cause offense whether you're trying to or not, right?
Yeah, right.
They didn't like the title. They said, This Is Their Land is not the title we like. I'm like, it's a line Canby says in the film. And they were like, we don't care. All right. I'm not gonna continue to plead my case with you. I'm gonna make the movie.
Yeah.
And sometimes you do have to do that, right? I always try to make myself available, right? Because a lot of times I'm the writer and the director. I'm like, hey, throw all of your anger at me and I can handle it, right? If you don't like it, go ahead, tell me. I'll talk to you. Here's my phone number. Right. But I'm still going to make the movie.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and you get to, producer, director, executive producer, you get to say, none of that belongs to anybody who's back here working. It all belongs to me. So you can have that conversation with me. And understand that once we have this conversation, you want me to make a call, I'm going to make it. It may not go your way. I'm going to hear you out. But I got a movie to make.
Right?
So you've got 120 seconds to make your case, and I'm willing to hear it, but I'm also willing to say no. So go. And that kind of thing, I don't know, just a lot of times just standing up in front of somebody and respectfully and saying, hey, I've got a job to do. Like making these projects is hard. Right now, like every time I think we get close to getting Felipe moving forward, and it has moved a long way, it gets hung up on something because there's real lives that are spinning. So my plates are spinning and I'm like, that plate's not going to spin. I got to take it off the stick and put it on the ground until that person is ready to get their plate spinning again. And it's just the way it is. And I'd rather know that up front, like, hey, this is going to be hard, for us. We don't like the wording. Like, hey, I can't change the wording You know, I have to. Here's the thing. This is a big thing, and people don't understand. It's like your feelings in this case don't matter because I have to sell this thing. I've got to take it out to whatever HBO, wherever it's going to be, and then they've got to be able to make money on it. And so this is what we've kind of talked about, and this is the direction we're going to go because that part don't make my job so impossible that I can't make this thing.
Yeah, and you know, sometimes it's standing up to people who don't like the project you're making. Sometimes it's standing up to people who kind of want you to make a different project. You know, we had a mentor. I'm gonna not name him, but he's a very big director in Hollywood, and he did not like my script. He kept saying, "There's a ritual at the beginning. Where are the drums?" And I'm like, "I'm not making that kind of Western." And I kind of had to put my foot down towards him. And, you know, I was 20, and I think he thought that I was a cocky little shit. And maybe I was a cocky little shit. Maybe I am a cocky little shit. But at some point,
a cocky little shit.
You have to. You kind of have to be, right? You have to be able to say, this is my thing. I'm doing it the way I'm going to do it. And I'll try to listen to you. But if you're not at all on the same wavelength as me, you're not on this project.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
Go make your own version.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the other
Watch
thing.
how fucking hard it is.
Oh my God. Yeah. There's a lot of truth in that. You know, when you write something with a group of people and you're the person that has the words, then they want to come up and you get to reach a point. And it's exactly what I'll say. I'll say, you know what? I've written this version. You should write one that you like.
Yeah.
And then that's it. And it shuts them up because they're not a person that writes things. You know, like I wanted their input. I got their input. This is what I've made. This is what we're going to go forward with. Well, I don't like, you know, like write another one. Impress me. Change my mind. Go do some work. I don't want to hear ideas and jib flapping. I appreciate all that stuff, but put pen to paper, hand me something or don't.
Yeah.
But this one's done.
As a creative, as any form of creative, you're going to get a million notes, and about 90% of them are not going to work for you. And that's okay. Right?
Yeah.
You want to hear all their ideas because you need to be able to say, I heard your idea and it's not the right one for me. Right. And I think, you know, we as creatives, we do look for feedback a lot, but you also need to be able to say, not all feedback is created equal. Right? Some people's feedback is going to mean more to you. Some people are going to mean they're going to understand your project better. They're going to know what you're going for better. And you need to be able to tell people, thank you for your input. Not the right project for you. Moving on.
Yeah. This is an exceptionally hard business to do. There's a lot of people in it, but you can conceivably know over half of them within a short amount of time, right? Because there's just at some point there's only so many people. I mean, there's a lot, right? And as you get to know people and you're easy to work with, or you're someone who's productive. Productive doesn't mean easy to work with. They can be different things. Yeah. You know, you develop a reputation so that you get to make things, and people do come to you. They're like, hey, I've got an idea. I need to get this thing done. Here's, you know, whatever these things happen. So 10 years from now, when Emery is sitting back going, I can't believe where I've come from. What does that look like? Is it 2 films? Is it 5? What does it look like for you? Like if you could say, this is a pretty fair estimate on where I'm going to be.
I think for me, I hate to say it, but I just want to get a feature film on the belt. It's been so long at this point without a feature, and I want to make a feature. I know some people love TV, and more power to them. I like writing TV sometimes, but God, I fell in love with movies, and I want to make movies. And, you know, if my first feature is about the barge fight, awesome. If my first feature is making a feature version of the Modoc story and watching that siege on a big screen and full surround sound one time,
kaboom.
That's what I want, you know. And when I set out to make This Is Their Land, you know, I had a Hollywood Foreign Press Association fellowship. They had gotten behind it. They'd put up funding for the film. I knew that I was going to get to make it, right? And so I told myself, I was like, hey, what if I don't find a job in the film industry after this? What if I am going to go end up in marketing or wherever the hell I end up? One movie I make. Is this going to be a movie I'm proud of making? And
yeah.
and so, that's why I worked so hard on that film, because I always want to make the best possible thing I can. If I'm going to spend my time on it, I want it to come out great. So, I mean, I'd love to tell you that in 10 years, I've got, 5 features all put out, and I'm constantly on the festival circuit, and I'm constantly going everywhere. But projects don't always fall into your lap that fast.
Sure.
And
Sure.
if I could make, my feature of the Modoc War in the next 5 years, and if all my Modoc, consultants, if Debbie Riddle and Taylor Tupper and all these excellent people are around and alive to watch it, that's a huge win for me. And
no, it is.
It's all I want to do, really. I love the job I'm currently doing, but if you said, hey, I've got $5 million, make the Modoc War story, I would drop everything right now to go and spend my life doing it,
Yeah. And legitimately, the way I look at this is, there's a person right now going to bed tonight. It's like, man, I'd love to make something cool about the Indians of California. And they've got the means, right? That person exists. And so, have to know enough people that can go out and find that money. The other thing, so I love your answer about 10 years, because you just don't know. There's, especially for actors, but anybody in this kind of art, like if someone came along and said, Emery, we've got a job for you, just dumb luck, your Chapman connections or whatever. Yeah. And they're like, you can work for the next 25 years on a daytime drama. That is one of the best things that you could ever have happen to you in this business, because it's just job security like crazy. And you can just sit down and just write stories all the time, direct, whatever it's going to be. Right. But it's golden handcuffs, and so I think about these, anybody who gets into these careers and there's someone whose career is built on, guesting on procedurals. Oh, I've been in that one 5 times. I've been 5 different characters, and they just get, but they have the pleasure of being an actor who's busy, and it's just procedural, and they make a ton of money. They get to live a very specific and comfortable life, but that wasn't why they got into it, and yet it is, right? So what do you think if you just spent the next 30 years and you're just making projects? Sometimes they're projects you want to do, sometimes they're projects that pay you the bills, and you look back and there's, let's say, 20 projects in 30 years, but they aren't filled with things from your heart. Is that all right?
I don't know if it would be for me, right? I mean, I know a producer on Days of Our Lives, and he's been doing it for like 10 years, and it's a soap, and that's excellent, if that's what you want to do.
Right.
I don't know if it's for me. Just like I sometimes get asked, would you see your career ending in a TV writer's room? And I'm like, I know that I would. And I don't know that that's completely fair. I think I know excellent TV writers. I know people who made that their whole lives, and love it. But long form content has never quite been my thing. I love to change genres. I love to kind of bounce around. The project that really might be the closest to getting finished for me, even though we've mostly talked about history tonight, is a dark comedy that's somewhere between Heathers meets Weekend at Bernie's. Right now, that's not anything close to what we've been discussing tonight.
No, not at all. No,
that's maybe the project that's actually the closest to being finished, because it's original, it's funny, and it costs less, right? I mean, it's a less than $1 million movie. It's easier to find somebody who will fund that, right? And so I think as long as I'm creating stories that I am passionate about, even if it is TV, right? If you got me on some 25-year drama, but God, I loved it, I would be happy. But if you do have me on, for example, a show I love, Criminal Minds, ran for like 16 years. If I was 16 years on Criminal Minds, I might lose my mind. I just don't know if I could do it. And I like the show. I really do. But I don't know if I could do it. Because I like to write in different genres. I like the thrill of finding a story. I like when you bring to me, hey, I heard this story about Storyville, and all of a sudden I'm, miles deep in a rabbit hole of research, because I like finding the story. And I hate to say it about TV, because I do love it, but at a certain point, you're creating stories with the same characters and the same the same
Yep.
formula. And as much as I
Yeah.
enjoy the stories, I do struggle to find a way to get that joy of finding a new story, finding new characters, getting inside someone new's head.
Yeah. 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 No, that's what's exciting. And if you're willing to take the pain, you know, because there's no doubt about it, you can have a lot of freedom to make a lot of amazing things. And, you know, it only takes a couple of really big successful things to where you're a person that people come to with money as well as ideas, you know, and you're like, wow, you know, that's the thing I'm trying to get. Like, how do I reliably build streams in state, you know, relationships with people who have money that are like, Pete, this works. I see what you do. Let's invest in this project. And I'm like, I've got 3 for you. Which one do you want? You know? So yeah, I appreciate it. Are there any questions you want to ask me before we wrap this thing up?
Oh gosh. I don't know. I don't know if I have anything off the top of my head, Pete.
Yeah. Yeah. Of our 3 projects, which one do you like the best?
Gosh. You know, it's hard for me because the thing is, I don't think I thought that I would really be drawn to the Felipe project, but God, I love baseball. And it's really, it's funny because, you know, I'm in a space where I'm losing my team. I've been an Oakland A's fan my whole life.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
you know, for a while I was writing a project called John Fisher Must Die. And it was just, it was a bunch of A's fans in the last game in the Coliseum trying to assassinate John Fisher. It was a satire. And, you know, like, I think I've been struggling to find a way to reconnect with baseball as a sport that, you know, I played for most of my life and loved most of my life. You know, the 2012 Oakland A's season will always go down as one of my favorite memories ever. You know, I was there at Game 3 against the Tigers, and I don't know if I've ever quite had that feeling as when Cespedes hit that home run or when Coco Crisp robbed Prince Fielder in that game. And so, you know, it's kind of nice to be getting back to baseball in one way. And, you know, the barge fight is just, for anyone who doesn't know, it's just an unbelievable story.
Unbelievable.
We are talking about 2 legendary fighters who changed the shape of this sport forever. I mean, Jim Corbett fundamentally changes the science of boxing in numerous ways. And Joe Kowinski, while he may never become champion, he fights against all the greats. And according to Jack Johnson, he taught him how to play defense. So one of the greatest champions learns from Joe Kowinski, right? And these 2 guys, you know, it's one of only 2 barge fights to ever happen in history. And it's an incredible story. I mean, it is an incredible fight. It is a battle of 2 iron wills. And I always say that that's what's so incredible to me. You know, when I was writing an early version of an end for that story, I wrote about the story from the Bible of these guys wrestling maybe an angel, right? All through the night. But I talked about it because I just was like, that's what this fight is in a lot of ways. It is just, it is who can keep getting back up. They go for 27 rounds, and it's 27 rounds under the current rules, right? Like this isn't London Prize Ring. These guys are physically fighting for an hour and a half. And it is brutal. But what a testament to human willpower, right?
Yeah. The barge fight story is just incredible. And one of the things that Ron and I always talk about in terms of images is, and I think it's Koinski. He gets his face fixed during the fight.
Yeah.
He gets split and they cut with scissors. This is how they fix his face, everybody. It's fucking horrible.
And they don't bring any water, so they're dumping water from the bay that's got partial salt water in it on top of these guys. I mean, unbelievably, just like it's I would have dropped after round 3.
Yeah, you know, and this brings me back to the AI thing, because you talked earlier about this. Some of these worlds, you just financially have to create them because it doesn't exist in San Francisco. The Barbary Coast, gone. You know, these you know, the places where they fought. Sure, you can go find a horse stable somewhere, and I think the barn in Marin, I think that barn still exists, but that doesn't mean it's the right barn to go shoot at. And so you can create these worlds for a fraction of the cost. And so instead of spending, say, $7 million and getting to go to all the locations, you can spend $4 million and optimize, right? And so I want to employ people, but I also want to get this thing made. right? And I don't know anybody who's working harder on getting this particular project made than you, me, and Ron. Yeah. And if we can figure out all the pieces, man, it's going to be incredible. So I don't mind using AI in that case. I don't want to use AI to replace people that I can afford to pay.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to manage that, but that's really, I think, where we're at with that is how do I want to always use real musicians playing real instruments, right? That's what I want to do. Do I get to do that? I don't know.
It's a challenge. It's a challenge we're going to have to find the answers to. And, hopefully as this project continues to gain steam and gain momentum and we get things going, we'll find those answers. And one day somebody will be, who's never heard of this podcast will be watching our doc and going, my God, what an unbelievable story. And it will just rock their world. And
that's those three. Oh my God. I got 10 more beyond that I'm like, and then they have to do, just lay it out because there's just so much quality. There's so much quality there. There's so many great stories. So I can't wait to do it. You and I also have have you ever seen the movie Kenny and Company?
I don't think so.
Oh man. Well, when I talked about our hooligan movie, it's that movie that we all watched as kids. And I'm like, I need to make a modern version of this. So you and I will have to talk about that.
I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. So anybody who's watching this, if you want to work on incredible projects, let me know. Pete at breakitdownshow.com. Whether you like, hey, I got a lot of dough and I want to help you make something amazing, or you're like, hey, I just want to help. If you're a baby writer just trying to get a project going, I have work for you. You can work on the back end. Maybe I can pay you a little bit of money, but let me know. It takes a lot of people to get these things made.
Absolutely.
Anything else for you, Emery, before we wrap this up?
No, I'm all good.
All right. We are going to wrap this up. Everybody else, thanks so much for watching. And, you can always subscribe. That always helps. You can always go to the PayPal, breakitdownshow.com, hit the PayPal link. If you put a couple bucks in the pocket, that money goes into putting me on the road, traveling, replacing gear and everything else. And you guys know how much I move around. A lot of people help me do that. That's how you see me doing it. So put a couple bucks in each month. That goes a long way towards filling the tank or getting an airline ticket. All right. Everybody else, thank you so much. Emery, I'll be right back to you to say goodbye. Stand by. Go.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the